Okay, in the last couple lessons, we've been looking at different plans for Reconstruction, and what we want to do is take a moment to look at how the political situation of blacks in the South changes during this time. When you have these carpetbagger governments running the southern states, and when you have the radical Republicans running the Congress, we do see advances for African Americans politically during this time. The problem is that after Reconstruction ends, all of that's going to go away. And you're going to have the black codes, and you're going to have issues with this discrimination that goes on. And so during this time, when we have these different plans for Reconstruction being put forward, we see that African Americans are making up the majority of voters in some pretty key states. Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi. Those are states where blacks are able to actually take control of the government for a little while. They make up the majority of voters, and they're able to actually win some seats in those southern governments. No state senate had a majority of southern black of African American senators. And there weren't any African American governors during this time either. They were seen as unqualified. They were seen as not really ready to take the mantle, even by some of their own former slave voters. And so, because they're seen as not being educated enough or not being ready enough to take that, the majority of voters, both black and white, are still going to elect whites to those upper government positions. We do have many representatives who end up entering the U.S. House of Representatives who are African Americans, and we also have two black senators, Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce. They are elected and are able to take their seats during these Reconstruction times. Now, what happens after Reconstruction ends, though, is that a lot of those black codes are put into force, and a lot of discrimination happens. Even with the protections of the 15th Amendment, there was no way of spelling that out unless the carpetbaggers and unless the radical Republicans were going to continually monitor that situation. They didn't put into place adequate safeguards to guarantee black voters. And so, while it is legal for them to vote, it's a whole different thing in practice. You were allowed to vote, but you had to pass several tests, and you had to jump through those hoops, which are deliberately set up so that African Americans couldn't vote in the South. And so while you do have some black representation in state governments and in the national government, once Reconstruction ends, that all goes away, and they begin to elect, it's only white voters who are voting at that point, and they are electing only white Southern Democrats in order to represent them in their legislatures. We have two terms here that we want to talk about: scalawags and carpetbaggers. Now, we've talked quite a bit about the carpetbaggers. They were Northerners who moved south in order to help reconstruct the South and guarantee the rights of African Americans. But then you had scalawags, and scalawag was a term used for somebody who was from the South, who was formerly of the Confederacy, and they were usually not Democrats. They were usually Unionists or people who had belonged to the old Whig Party, who favored Southern Reconstruction as dictated by the national government. And so they were seen as traitors to their own people, people who had turned against their own government, and so this is where the term scalawag comes from. And so it's meant a traitor, somebody who betrays their own, somebody who's untrustworthy. And so the former Confederates accused them of a number of different crimes, of taking all the money that was in the South and redistributing among the former slaves and making life miserable for Southerners. And a lot of those stories were just slander. They weren't true. And so as a reaction against this, you have a very angry, violent reaction against this. And so we see the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. This is not a government organization, although a lot of the members who are in the KKK are also people who are going to be elected to government. They're also going to be people who are in the police force. They're also going to be people who are in the military, the National Guards, the militias of each state. And so these were whites who were turning violent against anybody who was assisting blacks or anyone who was encouraging blacks to stand up for themselves. And so the KKK is known as the Invisible Empire of the South. It was founded in Tennessee in 1866, and it is a secret society. Sometimes the KKK is exaggerated, where it seems like everybody belonged to the KKK. That's probably not true. It's probably true that the KKK was a vast minority of Southerners, but that minority was a very powerful minority, and most of the people of the South, while they may not have belonged to the KKK, were sympathetic with what the KKK wanted. This was a group that was standing up for bringing back the social structure of the South as it was before the war. And so it was a reaction against the radical rule, and they used terrorism. And your notes talk about the terrorism of the KKK because these were illegal acts in order to bring about a political or social change, which is the definition of terrorism. And so they would often break into homes, they would often murder or lynch, they would often prevent Southerners or Southern blacks and carpetbaggers from expressing their rights, freedom of speech and all those kinds of things. But it was probably a vast minority that was supported by a majority. And so the idea that everybody belonged to the KKK is not true, but that most people did support them, well, that is probably true.